Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. As you listen today, let one idea shape what you do next. My name is Anthony Codis-Bodie, and today's guest raised over $20 million in scholarships for children in need, built a smart home for a catastrophically wounded veteran, and received the title of Commendatore from the President of Italy. None of that was part of the plan when he left the Marine Corps as a sergeant and went to work at PricewaterhouseCoopers as a young CPA. He took a leap that most people in his position would never have considered. And what happened next took 50 years to fully unfold, and there were moments along the way that would have stopped most people cold. Meet Frank Fusaro, co-founder and president of the Forum Group, a veteran-owned staffing firm he launched in New York City in 1974. The firm now spans 10 practice areas, employs over 100 recruiters, and has placed talent across accounting, legal, IT, healthcare, and beyond for over half a century. Frank has earned 3 awards from the New York State Society of CPAs, including the Lifetime Achievement Award. His story is proof that the discipline you build in one chapter of life has a way of funding every other chapter that follows. But before we get into that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Adback Benefits Agency. Listen, if you run a business, you are likely stuck in the cycle of rising insurance premiums. You're paying more, but your team is getting less, and many people can't afford coverage at all. We do things differently. We provide your staffing employees with unlimited access to doctors, therapists, and prescriptions that's always free for them to use. It's even great for temporary and high turnover roles. But here's where you really need to pay attention. Unlike every other employee benefit out there, our program puts more money into your company's bank account. As an example, we recently helped a client increase net profits by $900 per employee per year. Gains like that can change how a business is valued. All right, back to our guest today, the president of the Forum Group, Frank Fusaro. Thanks for making the time to share your story today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Anthony.
So I want to go back real early on. The year that you were born, your father passed away. Tell us about that.
Well, it's not as sad as you might think, in the sense that I think if you lose a parent when you're 10 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, it's a lot worse. My dad passed when I was about 4 months old. We moved in with my grandmother in a very traditional situation. I had, it was a multi-family building. I had 3 uncles in the building, so I never wanted for parental guidance. But if anyone shaped my life, who was my hero, it was my mother, who raised us. Basically, I have a certificate here from Home Relief. This is dated January 11, 1949. This is a grant to my brother and I of $21 each. Actually, I got a penny more because I was younger, but I always said I was worth more. And she got about $30. It was a total of about $75 a month. But I don't remember missing anything or wanting anything. When I was 8 or 9 years old, my mother remarried it was a dock boss on Pier 11 in Brooklyn. One of the neighborhood guys, but the most ethical human being you ever met. So he was also a tremendous influence on my life. And, I've been blessed so many times. My only wish in life now is I could start all over.
And do it all over again?
Absolutely. It's been a joy. It's unbelievable. I went to a Jesuit high school in Brooklyn, 4 trains and a 15-minute walk through Crown Heights, which is a tough thing. It's a tough neighborhood. My brother was a senior when I was a freshman. He was class valedictorian, editor of the yearbook, captain of the baseball team, and student council president. Here I come along, and I graduate at the bottom of my class. And all I got for 4 years, and I love my brother dearly, was "You'll lose, brother." As a matter of fact, years later, I'll tell you a very quick story. Years later, Tom Tizzy was a good dear friend of mine. He was the vice chairman of AIG, and he worked directly for Hank Greenberg, who was my client and who I known pretty well. and he asked me to join the board of the St. Vincent's Services, which was formerly St. Vincent's Home for Boys in my old neighborhood in Red Hook, Brooklyn, where my mom threatened to send me every day of my life. So we're at the first board meeting, and the chairman of the board comes up to me at the end of the meeting after they introduced me, says, Fusaro, Lou Fusaro, Brooklyn Prep. I said, yeah, that was my brother. He said, you must have been a D student. I said, I was, but how did you know? He says, well, obviously A, B, and C students wind up working for D students, so you did well. So that was I tell that story a lot when I give my speeches around the country.
And that was going to be my question. I have a lot of guests on this show who were top of their class, went to elite universities, and I've got a number of folks who really struggled in school. It just wasn't for them. Maybe there was some undiagnosed ADHD, which didn't really exist at the
like
time.
That. It was
learning disability. What was your situation, and why do you think that you rose to the level that you have?
Well, listen, the reason I did poorly in school, no ADD or whatever. I took 4 trains to high school, and if you're a minute late, you got detention. And I was taking 4 years of Latin, French, theology, et cetera, and I had basically very little interest in it. And it was a great school, but not for me. So that's what led to the next chapter of my life.
Before we get to that next chapter, tell me a little bit more about your mother's personality and what you were able to learn from her growing up.
Thinking back over the years, she was a rock. She always had a smile on her face. She was even-tempered and even-keeled, and she was just an inspiration. And whatever. When you lose a parent that young, it doesn't affect you as much, because this is what I had. This is where I was, and I always embraced the situation. And I had, as I say, I had three uncles and 3 families, cousins in the building, and so on. So that was my life. And she made sure that we had everything we needed, and we wanted for nothing. We had nothing, but we wanted for nothing. So that was set the tone for my,
you had the most important thing. You had an abundance of family around you.
Love, guidance. And so I had an uncle who was a butcher. If we had meat, he would drop off some meat a couple of days a week. Otherwise, it was pasta and, pasta bajol. And, we had the fig tree in the back. And my grandmother, who didn't speak English, but Italians are funny. Second generation Italians don't speak English because first generation speaks to their parents in Italian, but they were so hard-bent to assimilate and become Americans. They wanted their children to become American. They wanted their children to speak English. And, I wouldn't trade that for the world.
I can relate to many parts of your story there, Frank. But let's go back. So you were at PricewaterhouseCoopers. You served in the Marine Corps. And then in 1974, you co-founded the Forum Group. Kind of quickly walk me through how those pieces fit together.
Well, it started, I graduated high school, again, at the bottom of my class at just turning 17. And I joined the Marine Corps, and that was a real turning point in my life.
Why?
And excuse me?
Why was that a big turning point for you?
Well, the Marine Corps has a way of giving you confidence, and that's what I lacked. You go through school and you be at the bottom of the class, struggling, just getting by, and so on and so forth, and you have a bright, shining light ahead of you. My brother, who I love dearly, you lack confidence. And what the Marine Corps did more than anything, and I had a very ordinary service. I joined at the beginning of in 1964. First combat troops in Vietnam. I had a very ordinary term with the Marine Corps. I never went to Vietnam. Most of the guys, I went to the Air Wing. I was a crew chief in a helicopter squadron, and most of my original platoon at Paris Island, they all went. Some came back, some didn't, but nobody came back the way they. So. I think of them a lot. Forgive me.
No.
So
it's
that shaped my life, and when I went to St. John's, and I did pretty well at St. John's, and knocked off the CPA exam 1, 2, 3. Went to Price Waterhouse, And while at Price Waterhouse, I was actually hired by a client of mine. It was a very difficult audit we were doing. I was very very adversarial position with the company, my client, because we were engaged by their parent company, and the president of my client had sold his company to, it was the old Seaberg jukebox people in Chicago. They were the Price Waterhouse client who engaged us to work for a company, Inland Dynatronics. So it was a very adversarial situation because his primary compensation, the president, in selling the company was growing the company. So every dollar was very, very material. So at any rate, after a year or so on the audit, they asked me to join them, and I was supposed to help be the assistant controller, but also help the national sales manager. 6 months later, the national sales manager leaves, and I become national sales manager, and I loved the job. And we were selling car radios and stereos and so on, and I opened up the military. So we were selling our equipment all over the United States and all over the world, actually, because the ship stores afloat and so on. I sold the Army and then the Navy and the Marine Corps. We sold the Air Force. I opened up a couple other major companies and started a program where I found a guy that could replicate um, the nose pieces of a radio, and we could sell radios to new car dealers, and they could install them, and they would be the same as an original equipment thing. So that was very successful. So at any rate, I made a lot of money. So, but traveling 80% of the time. Problem with my wife, my dear wife. We're married 53 years, Carol, and the travel was getting to me, but I could never replicate the job because I didn't have the experience to warrant that job. At any rate, to make a long story short, I had been with Price Waterhouse with a peer of mine, Steve Goldstein, and he and another fellow, Mark Gilbert, wanted to start a business, and they called me and they asked my advice and so on. And then eventually they asked me to join them. So the three of us started the firm, and not having any experience in the staffing firm, I said I'll take responsibility for the public accounting profession. And I immediately joined the New York State Society of CPAs, got very active with them, got very active, went out and met with every client face to face. And as it turns out, luck has a lot to do with it because there's no such thing as a self-made man. My clients were wonderful. And after about a year, I formed a group of human resource professionals at all of the big 8 firms in those days, and 2 of the national firms, Seidman and Grant Thornton. So I had 10 firms, and I said, listen, you guys, you fight for entry-level students as your employees, and your companies fight for clients. But other than that, you have all common problems. So why don't we get together? And I put together this group, and there were 11 of us, the top guys in the HR world of public accounting. And from that, I developed the most incredible relationships with the firms. In those days, turnover was a major problem with them. And I started, it says, okay, guys, give me all your entry-level hirings, male, female, graduate, undergraduate, and got reported back to them. This is the total number and so on. And this is your individual number. And every year I said, again, give me your entry level class and who left from the prior years. And after about 12, 15 years, I could tell them how many people they lose to the head. It was so consistent. And the biggest problem was turnover. So I said, okay, if there's turnover is the problem, let's look at that. And I started a study at the State